Man, Pokemon is too easy nowadays. They make the modern games for straight babies, y'all. These games grab my little hand and forcibly hold it so dang much that our palm sweat is starting to blend. And on top of that, these trees are far from high quality, as are these animations. Is this Pokemon Sword and Shield or an early access copy of Digimon Survive? I just wish Game Freak would change things up a bit. Give us a challenge, for God's sakes. Give us a fully fleshed out and competent game. Well, do I have news for you? I have a product that will solve all of your problems and more. A game with difficulty, with polish, an interesting storyline. Heck, you could probably get your rocks off to this game if you're desperate enough. All this and more can be yours. The Pokemon games can be saved from mediocrity, and good times can once again be had by all with the simple power of... If you aren't familiar with these two Pokemon games, let me give you a bit of a taste of the absolute sexiness. Pokemon Colosseum and XD Gale of Darkness are some spicy little Pokemon spin-off games from the GameCube era, from 2003 and 2005 respectively. XD Gale of Darkness was the sequel to Pokemon Colosseum. Both games take the basic Pokemon formula and add some interesting spins to the gameplay experience. First of all of the battles in both games are double battles, every one of them, so the game is entirely built around that mechanic. Both games are based around the idea of catching or snagging these evil little homies called Shadow Pokemon, which are basically Pokemon that have been kidnapped and turned evil by the bad boys of this game, Team Cypher. Both games give you starters of some kind, not the typical starters though. You don't really have a choice in what you get in this game. Colosseum gives you Umbreon and Espeon as your starters, and XD Gale of Darkness gives you a single little Eevee boy, and obviously you could choose who you want to evolve him into from there. And after your starters, pretty much the only Pokemon you're going to be catching in this game are Shadow Pokemon that you snag from the evil doers, and that you then have to purify into their regular selves. There are other non-Shadow Pokemon that you get from the game, but those are very few and far between. The vast majority of Pokemon you're going to be catching are going to be Shadow Boys that you gonna have to snag. You go through the game saving as many Shadow Pokemon as you can while taking down the evil team piece by piece. These were childhood favorites of mine, I gotta be honest. And let me tell you, everything is so much harsher in these games, especially compared to modern Pokemon standards. The story is darker, like in Colosseum, you play as an ex-member of the evil Team Cypher gone rogue. The towns are grimier and more corrupted. The region itself is basically a massive desert with little to no Pokemon in the wild, and the battling gets tough. Double battles are usually regarded as more difficult on average than regular single battles, since there are just so many more things to consider during a battle. And on top of that, these games give you a very limited selection of Pokemon to choose from. Since there are only so many Shadow Pokemon available to snag, it wouldn't really make sense to have the entire roster of Pokemon up to this point be available, because you're just snagging them from the evil doers. They aren't going to have every single Pokemon, that would be redonkulous. XD Gale of Darkness introduced a small handful of wild Pokemon that trainers could catch, but options were still exceptionally limited compared to main series games. And to go even further, some of the enemies in this game are monstrous battlers, some using legitimate competitive strategies to beat you, and some just have actual legendaries on their teams. And to add to the chaos, pretty much all of the legendaries you'll face are Shadow Pokemon. So not only do you have to worry about beating the trainer's team, you also have to try to actively catch each Shadow Pokemon without killing it and without letting it kill you. That's hard enough to do with regular Shadow Pokemon, but when you're trying to snag one of them legendary boys in the heat of a double battle, stuff gets tough. Stuff is absolutely outrageous in this game. Besides the difficulty, another aspect I absolutely love about this game compared to the main series Pokemon games is the setting of the Ore region. Every location has a super rustic feel to it, a real earthy vibe that I really dig. The desert environment is a really cool idea for a region with a more mature take on Pokemon. The corruption from the evil team that spreads throughout the region is apparent and really makes you suspicious of every character you come across. These games were clearly made with slightly older audiences in mind. Not necessarily adults, of course, but older kids and young teens, the kind of players that would be able to understand the more advanced concepts of Pokemon a little bit better than their younger age group counterparts. That's not something we've seen from Pokemon in quite a while, difficult, and that is partly the reason why I think remakes of these games could go a long way to revitalize the Pokemon franchise. There are so many reasons why remakes or remasters could be amazing right now, but we'll start with the obvious one: difficulty. Now, Pokemon has never been a particularly tough game series. As long as you could somewhat grasp the concept of type advantages, you can usually get through the games without too much effort, especially in the more recent games, where they make things so easy for the player that the rival even picks the starter Pokemon that's weak to your choice. And having recently released games like Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, it's clear that Game Freak is targeting a younger demographic of players, which is fine. That makes sense. That's probably the most lucrative business move they can be making right now. The problem, however, lies in the fact that Pokemon has a very strong fan base of longtime players as well. People that grew up with the series, that understand the mechanics pretty well and don't really need their handheld in any way. These players aren't challenged by the more recent Pokemon games, and they have to actively work against themselves to make the games more difficult, and therefore more entertaining. Without doing that, the games become kind of tedious to longtime players. If there isn't a comfortable and fun level of challenge being presented, then the game isn't very exciting to play, and that's been a problem that started to plague Pokemon more and more. This is where our lads come in. Game Freak could really dip into the older demographic with games like Colosseum and Gale of Darkness. First of all, the nostalgia is obviously there. That's something that sells remakes like hotcakes. We all know remakes for older games can do exceptionally well when effort is put into them. Look at the Resident Evil series, the Crash Bandicoot series, Spyro. All of these old-time fan-favorite game series that have gotten resurrections in the past few years have been absolutely selling off the shelves like you wouldn't believe. Even Pokemon kills it in the remake department when they go for older main series games like Fire Red and Leaf Green, Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. All games that are pretty highly regarded. And with spin-off titles like Pokemon Snap and Mystery Dungeon getting some love from Game Freak, I think there'd be no better time to bring back the old GameCube classics. So make your older fans happy with remakes of your more difficult and gritty games, Nintendo. Got it? Good. Next point. So with each generation of Pokemon, each new game in the series becomes progressively more difficult to make. Or at least I imagine so. Constantly adding new Pokemon, having to add new and interesting mechanics, having to bring back as many old Pokemon as possible, and just trying to please such a wide and diverse fan base. It's a daunting task, no doubt whatsoever. I can understand some of the less than loved decisions that Game Freak has made with some of the more recent entries, such as cutting many of the Pokemon from Sword and Shield. However, despite that fact, it still seems like Pokemon as a whole gets a lot less polish and ironing out than the vast majority of other major Nintendo titles. Like, a lot less. These games are kinda garbage in many respects. Visually, mechanically, animation-wise, these games are severely lacking in a lot of departments. You put Breath of the Wild next to Sword and Shield, and it looks like Sword and Shield came out a console generation before Breath of the Wild, not a year and a half after. Granted, these are two very different games, I'll give you that. Still, you could tell that one was made with extreme care and attention to detail, and the other, not so much. Sure, the game still works well enough, and it's enjoyable for the most part, but it has nowhere near the cohesiveness and the overall polish that I expect from modern Nintendo games. It's Nintendo's most profitable franchise, for God's sakes. These games should be mind-blowing with the amount of money they make for the company. So how could Colosseum and Gale of Darkness remakes be beneficial in that respect? Well, like I said, the selection of available Pokemon in each game is already a fraction of what main series games have to offer. And for perfectly understandable in-game reasons. There aren't any wild Pokemon in these games either. It's almost entirely snagged shadow Pokemon. They wouldn't have to put in the work to implement wild Pokemon, or the work it would take to bring every single Pokemon into the game. They could just bring in a few. They could either go with the exact same Pokemon that were available in the original versions of the game, or better yet, change up which Pokemon were in the game. These games were only released in Gen 3, so it would be really cool to see some more modern Pokemon in a re-release, a remaster, or heck, even a sequel to these games. You could add a fun little handful of diverse Pokemon from all sorts of different generations, but you wouldn't have to worry about adding nearly as many as you would with a main series game. The workload for implementing Pokemon overall would be cut from the get-go. And second, in these games, you don't travel via routes from town to town. It's all based on fast traveling to towns, buildings, and other important locations, which makes sense. Like I said, the game region is literally a desert, so traveling between different locations would just involve wading through dunes of sand a lot of the time. Like you could see in the fast travel cutscenes, your boy is just kinda riding through pretty much blank space. So it makes sense for there not to be really any routes and just to have a vehicle that you ride in to fast travel from one place to the other. And especially since there aren't any wild Pokemon to be catching, there is absolutely zero need for routes between towns. Keep the fast travel mechanic in, and boom, suddenly you only need to make a couple towns and locations. You don't need to make a vast, expansive world with a wild area or very interconnected towns. You just need to make a few individual little spots. Of course, it wouldn't be a bad idea to add some new in-game locations and areas, especially places to add some post-game content, but even with additions, you weren't looking at making a whole region, like I said, and with those things alone, Game Freak would be able to focus less on adding as many Pokemon as possible and building an expansive world, and instead they could really nail down the finer details, make the gameplay experience super player-friendly, make the animations more fluid and lively, add more depth to the characters and story, and really make each in-game location shine with some amazing visuals in HD. I'd love to see places like Pyrite Town or Mount Battle brought into the modern day. Use the extra time to fine-tune the experience to perfection, just like how other modern remakes really bring out everything that made the older games great, while at the same time kind of modernizing the more dated aspects of the game. If done well, my god, these games could be amazing. They'd sell trillions of copies across the globe. And that's coming from a 23-year-old with no experience in the games industry whatsoever. So you know I know what I'm talking about. And I genuinely think remakes of these games could be possible for a couple reasons. Number one, Pokemon have been on a roll of revitalizing old fan favorite spin-off titles like Pokemon Snap and Mystery Dungeon, as well as adding new spin-off titles like Cafe Mix and Pokemon Unite. So they're definitely still riding high on the spin-off wagon. Second, Shadow Pokemon have been in Pokemon Go for a hot while, and they directly borrow the purification imagery with the Relic Stone from these games. They're acknowledging the game's existence and kind of confirming their places in the overall Pokemon canon, or at the very least the mechanics introduced in these games. And third, Nintendo announced the Super Mario 3D All-Stars recently, which will include the first ever re-release of the GameCube classic Super Mario Sunshine. Nintendo might be getting more open to remaking games from that era that have cult followings. Of course, I'm not holding my breath for it to happen, because you never know. But if it does happen, I really hope Game Freak and Nintendo take an approach like the one I kind of laid out here, and make the game something special. Really pay attention to the finer details, and bring out every bit of potential this game has. Being able to play through modernized versions of these games would be an experience that many of us older fans haven't had in Pokemon games in nearly a decade. We'd be getting the challenge we've been missing for years from Pokemon games. If Game Freak put in the effort, I think they'd be capable of making a really enjoyable experience with these games. But what do you want to see Game Freak do with Pokemon next? Are you hankering for them Colosseum remakes? Or do you think that would be a bad move? What's your opinion on it? Let me know. And of course, y'all have a beautiful day. Thanks for watching. Love ya. Mean it. Take care, everyone.